Medina Institute for Leadership and Entrepreneurship, MILE.
Fantastic, Dr. Jaffrey. Thank you very much for the opportunity and also for the introduction. I really appreciate it. And I really have the privilege of speaking today about a person that has been my role model for a long time, but also having the growing up in South Africa where we really saw all the transformations firsthand. And the topic often that whenever I find people talk about Nelson Mandela, everyone knows that he is a great man. But I seldomly, if I would ask people, tell me your opinion of why you think he's a great man, they will tell you about what he did. And yes, Nelson Mandela did achieve the unthinkable of getting two totally different governments to converge, to reconcile, and to settle for a peaceful negotiation. He spearheaded the most advanced democracy in the world doing that. So he achieved wonderful things. But I think the most important thing for me is we all know that he was great, but let's have a look more at the model that made Nelson Mandela this astounding person. And maybe the best thing first would be to say, if we talk about Nelson Mandela, sometimes, people would think, it's just the right time, right place, and he was lucky. But I think the purpose of my presentation would most definitely be to display a whole model of emotionally intelligent leadership that made him this outstanding leader, and that it was never a question of just being a person being at the right time and the right place to let all these things happen, but a person who prepared himself and used his time even in jail to prepare himself for becoming one of the strongest servant leaders that the 21st century has ever experienced. Of leadership, the definition of servant leaders, it stands on three pillars. And that's very important that people should understand that servant leaders are people who always influence other people to look in a certain direction and to help them achieve shared goals. So they need to have tremendous, powerful influence abilities. And so many times when I work with people and we talk about leadership, we see that their idea of what they think leadership is all about is often obscure because of the wrong examples of leadership that we see all around us. And the world very definitely is in a leadership crisis for the reason that we don't always clearly understand what leadership is all about. Many people confuse leadership with people standing on a platform who have positions of leadership, but it does not necessarily mean they have great leadership skills to influence, to inspire, and to serve. Also, often many people who are dictators are very dominant, but that does not mean that they are good leaders. It just means they bully people, they dominate people to get often what they want. So the whole idea of leadership is to say there are three pillars, and these three pillars are leaders need to have the ability to influence others, not to coerce or to threaten people to get them to do what you want them to do, but to get people by their own free choice to follow you and to follow the vision that you as a leader have set and influenced them with. Now, the second pillar, which is about inspiration, is the most powerful form of learning is imitative learning. And imitative learning says we learn by example. We follow the examples that we see and experience in the world. And this means that the second primary trait of a servant leader is they inspire people through the example that they set. And they also set the example of what they want their followers to be and to become. So they do not expect of their followers what they are not willing to be themselves first. And I think this was one of the major things. If we look within context of these three things of influence, inspiration, and service, Nelson Mandela. The word service means to anticipate, recognize, and meet other people's needs. And that means leadership for the servant leader is not about what am I going to get. It is about serving others. That means anticipate, recognize, and meet the needs of the people that you are responsible for. So you take care of them and you try to do whatever you can to take care of their needs. And in terms of Nelson Mandela, he was a fantastic example of someone who had tremendous influence abilities. He didn't have to coerce or threaten or bully people in order to get them to achieve a certain goal. In South Africa, we experienced it often that his political opponents like F.W. de Klerk, who actually was responsible for changing the legislation so that Nelson Mandela could come out of jail, that although they were political opponents, they actually got an ability to influence friend and political enemy and to get them looking in the same direction. And that's a tremendous trait that he had. He had tremendous communication and negotiation skills that made him influence people without having to bully or coerce or dominate or threaten them. Then obviously Nelson Mandela never expected any person to do something that he was not willing to do himself. And therefore he always was a great inspiration to the nation. He was an example to all of us. If you ask people in South Africa what was his life about, people will say it was about reconciliation. And he set that example to us, and he became the change of that example. So despite sitting unjustly in jail for 27 years, he comes out of jail and he still is an inspirational example of reconciliation, of friendliness, of caring, of love for people, and he chooses to that he has experienced in life, he still chooses to set an example being part of the solution and not being part of the problem. Also, what is essential that Nelson Mandela never had any personal ambition that he used other people to vote for him in order to get into positions of power. So in his politics, so he was a leader in the political arena, playing a politician's role, but he was never just a politician trying to get votes so that he can come into a position of power to do what he wanted to do. He always served the people. He would often, whenever he addressed the people, he would say to them that if you choose me as your leader, then I suggest we do this and this. But he never campaigned for it, and he never tried to just get votes. But he truly, in South Africa, we call Nelson Mandela Madiba, which means father of the nation. And the idea of this is that the example that he set was so powerful that everyone sees him as the father who sets the tone and the example of how things should be. And the reason for that was because he always tried to anticipate, recognize, and meet other people's needs. But in this afternoon, I want to quickly explore a model that made him a fantastic leader. And this model is a great model that you can incorporate into leadership in business, leadership in schools, leadership programs for children. But even if I'm just a parent and a worker, I can use this model and apply this blueprint that I'm going to discuss with you this afternoon to my own personal life. Because we have to remember that leadership is never about position. It is always about influence, service, and inspiration. And we can do those three things without having necessarily a platform before we have to do that. Now, there are two legs that good leadership stands on. And the first leg that good leadership stands on is intrapersonal competence. You as an individual need to be a strong person. And then the other leg that good leadership stands on is Now the idea is that we need to understand that leaders are strong people, but leaders lead others. So you've got to be a strong person, but leadership is always about leading other people. And therefore, these two legs of leadership are of equal importance and are vital for any leadership development program. Now, you can't give to others what you don't have first. So there's a certain sequence of this model that one has to take into consideration. If we look at a person who is, for instance, got strong intrapersonal competence, but not very good interpersonal competence. It means they are strong people, but they would often be very egocentric and self-centered, focusing mainly more on what they can get for themselves, but not taking other people into consideration. When we get people who have strong social competence, so they're very good at working with other people, and they love other people and they really care and serve others, but they are not strong individuals, then you get a person again who becomes a people's pleaser. So the idea in terms of leadership development is to find this balance between the intrapersonal and the interpersonal competence. In other words, finding the balance between being a strong person who have good skills to establish strong social bonds with other people. That is going to be the two legs that a proper leadership plan should stand on. Now, in order to develop intrapersonal competence, it is going to be important that intrapersonal, we'll look at the framework a little bit more in detail. Strong intrapersonal competence begins when a person has strong, accurate self-awareness. And strong, accurate self-awareness says, I understand accurately who I really am. Accurate awareness says, I can answer questions like, who am I? Where am I going to? How am I going to get there? What is the truth of my life, of who I really am? What governs my behavior? What emotions drive me to do whatever it is that I do? Things like, why do I exist? So accurate awareness, many people think they know themselves. But often what they think about themselves is often the sum total of what others or their parents or society wanted them to think about themselves. To give you an example with regards to accurate awareness, when I was 30 years old, I believed I can't work with people, I can't talk to people, and I do not want to go into a line of business where I need to talk or work with people or speak on public platforms. And if at 30 you would ask me, do you think you know who you are? I would be quite arrogant by saying, of course I know who I am, and this is who I am. Now, 24 years later, what I realize is that my calling is to help people develop and become more of who they could be. But how I do that is working with people and talking to people. So what I have discovered in my journey of self-awareness about myself was that who I thought I was at 30 and who I discovered I became at 50 is two completely different people. And that means accurate awareness. We got to know who we are, because the strengths, the gifts, and the talents that we have will, one, tell you what type of value do you have. It will also tell you why you are acceptable as a human being, what worth you have, and why are you okay. But also, I believe that every human being have been equipped with talents and tools and gifts that will help them become the person they were destined to be. So looking inside, looking inwards, and discovering your gifts and strengths and tools and being accurately aware of what that entails actually is the point of departure for becoming on purpose. So many people, research suggests that only about 5% of society's people are truly accurately aware. Now, if we take it back to the Nelson Mandela framework, Nelson Mandela was a person who absolutely trusted his gifts, his strengths, his talents. He was never arrogant, never overconfident, if you can get something like that, but arrogant is actually being self-centered. It's got nothing to do with a servant leadership mindset. So Nelson Mandela understood that he had virtues and vices that he made available for the benefit of society. And he knew what he had to offer. He also understood his weaknesses. And there where he had weaknesses, he allowed other people in his leadership teams and his management teams to contribute. Where he had weaknesses, he allowed them to, with their strengths, strengthen him. That's the trademark of a great servant leader. They know what they have to offer, but they also know where they need to allow others to contribute in order to achieve the dream or the goal that they set out to do. The next leg of being a strong individual is that strong individuals manage themselves very effectively. In other words, the world changes very fast, and the world is always very challenging per se. But strong leaders manage themselves through the turbulence of change, still keeping focused on the goals that they have and the vision that they have, and regardless of that, they never lose sight of the goal, and they learn whatever they have to and do what is necessary to get through the turbulence of change to still achieve their objective. Nelson Mandela was a person who envisioned a world that was free and democratic, where everyone had equal rights, while he was actually sitting unjustly 27 years. In other words, more than 10,000 days. He was sitting in a world that just suggested the opposite of what he actually dreamed about. But self-management said that even if I sit in a jail, I will keep my mind and my focus on my dreams. Nelson Mandela was a person who was famous for saying, I was in jail for 27 years, but my mind was never in jail. Meaning with that he did not allow his physical environment to come and control his thinking or his dreams or even his great sense of humor. After 27 years being in jail, Nelson Mandela left jail, and he still was an optimist who had dreams and hope for the future, and he still had a great sense of humor, always laughing and seeing the positive side of life, never being bitter, but actually always becoming better. And that is what self-management is all about. And self-management per se starts with managing your mind and your thoughts. And it's a powerful statement to say, I was in jail for 27 years, but my mind was never in jail. That is where self-management starts. It starts by managing your mind in order to manage your behavior. And if you can manage your mind and your behavior, then you will produce, or then you can start changing behavior and following your dreams and your vision. What is great about self-management is to understand that self-management starts with mind management, managing your mind, managing your thoughts. A negative mind produces a negative life, and a positive mind produces a positive life. But a negative mind can never produce a positive life. And this was the thing that Mandela always understood, that even if he had an extremely challenging life, and many people in his shoes may have become bitter and vengeful because of that. Nelson Mandela understood that if he wanted to achieve this dream of a free and fair society and reconcile an unjust world, he had to have a positive mind in order to achieve a positive dream. A negative mind cannot achieve a positive dream. And therefore, he knew he was always a different type of thinker than any other political player in the South African landscape of politics during the time that Nelson Mandela came out of jail and that he was a president. So he understood that he had to take charge here in order to achieve the dream. So he is a fantastic example, not just of accurate self-awareness, but also of self-management. Now, when we look at the social becoming interpersonal competent, in other words, when I want to have good interpersonal skills, having the ability to establish strong social bonds with other people, this also stands on two legs. And just as self-awareness is the point of departure in becoming a strong individual, so social awareness is the point of departure in being good with other people. But what is important here is social awareness is about accurately understanding other people, accurately noticing them, understanding them, their truth, and taking them into consideration. But there's a sequence to this model that you see on the screen, because before I can be socially aware, I need to first be accurately aware. I cannot say I know other people when I do not know myself first, because you can't give to others what you do not understand yourself first. I cannot say that I understand my wife when I don't even understand myself first. And also, if we look at this model, I cannot manage other people if I do not manage myself first. So the sequence is we start with accurate self-awareness and as the first intrapersonal dimension you have to develop. Then you go and you develop self-management competence. And then we start with the social awareness to start developing your interpersonal competence, your ability to get along with other people. Leaders lead people. And if we don't have great interpersonal skills, we can never establish strong social bonds with them. And if we don't have strong social bonds and relationships with the people we are responsible for, we will not be able to lead them well. Now, social awareness says when you look at the people around you, you need to understand who they really are. Now, how can you do that? Who can actually say, I know other people? Very few people can, because we may think we may know things about other people, but at best, that is just a pure guess, nothing more. The only way we can truly know other people is when we spend one time with them to communicate with them, of which listening to what their truth entails is the point of departure. I cannot say I know my wife if I do not listen to her telling me what is her truth. And if I don't understand that, or if I'm unwilling to do that, I may think I know her, but I will not necessarily be correct in doing that. That's the challenge with society, that we often think we know things about those we are responsible for. But if we have not spent time to effectively communicate with these people and learn from them when they tell you what is my truth, then you will actually just guess who those people are. And social awareness, therefore, to get to know other people and know who they are, it starts by actually putting yourself in their shoes and saying, what must it be like to be this person? It means we are going to have to care about other people. It means that we're going to have to be empathic and try and look at the world the way that other people would be looking at the world. And that is going to be a huge challenge for us. It is a competence that you develop and not just an ability that you are born with. So social awareness, I believe, is the root cause of all evil in the world. If we do not care about other people, we can never influence, serve, or inspire them. So it is a vital competence that has to be developed in leadership that very, very, very seldomly in leadership development programs in the corporate world actually are successful. Now, we'll come back to the whole thing of social awareness just now. But the next leg that is vital is social skill. And social skill says you need skills to be good with other people. So many times people think just because they enjoy other people's company and they are quite social orientated that they have good interpersonal competence. Competence is a skill you develop. So social skill means that we need to be able to get along with, for instance, people that we do not know or people that we do not necessarily like. You will know that you are truly socially skilled when you can get along with another human being who is different from you, another human being who speaks a different language or has a different culture or has a different religion or has a different gender or a different political opinion about things. If you can get along with other human beings despite those differences, then you know that you are socially skilled. So very few people really are so skilled that they can get along with their political enemy. And this was one of Nelson Mandela's trademarks. For instance, he and Bill Clinton very seldomly agreed on many economic issues. But the bottom line, I have a video clip that clearly shows where Bill Clinton says that every time that Nelson Mandela phones me, I know he's going to ask me to do something that I would not want to do, but I'll anyway wind up doing it whether I wanted to do it or not. Now, in the first place, that shows great influence skills. But in the second place, it shows you great skills to get people who do not agree with you to still follow your suggestions. Great social skills, even if I do not agree with their political opinions or their worldviews and so forth. And that is what a leader really needs, of great social skill. So when you look at this whole blueprint, this blueprint is not something that you are born with. These are skills that we need to develop. Now, when we look at the model even further, we have identified, and we also present here in South Africa, programs, programs across the world, in different parts of the world actually, where we have developed a leadership development program based on this model. And we have identified there are many emotional intelligence skills, but we've identified 12 skills that we believe are of primary importance and that act as the foundations for that I have discussed with you so far. And the first one there is emotional self-awareness. Emotional self-awareness says, do you know which emotions influence and drive your behavior? Now, if I work in the world of business, I often ask people, do you work hard? Everyone always says yes, and yes, they're not lying. We all work hard. But if I ask them, why are you working so hard? What is it that drives you to do what you do? And research tells us that much more than 90% of the reasons why people work very hard is more focused on I'm doing things because I have to, not because I want to. And if we look at the underlying emotions of work, it is fear or greed or threat. But if you ask people, for instance, to give you an example, we have people working in mines and you ask them why do you work hard, they'll tell you, no, I have to do this, otherwise I won't survive. So they're responding from a survival point of departure. But many people work hard because they experience feelings of fear of recognition or fear of failure. Now, emotions are fuel. That drives your behavior, but you get two types, the good emotions and the bad emotions. Or let's name them as positive and negative emotions. When an emotion makes you feel bad, it means you produce biochemically in your body chemicals that drain your energy, weaken your immune system, and medium to long term, if you are a good thing for you. And it may lead to illness and even as drastically as shorten your lifespan. So being fear-driven, being anger-driven, eventually makes you stew in your own negative juices, if so to speak. Now the opposite is also true. A small percentage of people, if you ask them, why do you work? They'll say, but this is who I am, it's what I do, it is my purpose. It's this, not because I get money, but because this is who I am. So you often find, for instance, this type of mindset amongst teachers and nurses. They are not always paid that well, but they do their work with a passion because it's part of their purpose and they enjoy that and they get fulfillment from the work that we do. So in terms of accurate awareness, we've got to ask ourselves, what drives me to do whatever it is that I do? Sometimes, well, most people, I'm sure, if we work hard, that's doing the right thing. But often we do the right thing, but for the wrong reasons. We're running on the wrong fuel. And medium term, it's going to have a negative impact on your mental and physical well-being. The next important aspect is, who are you? Very often when I ask people that, who are you? They tell me what they have or what they do, and that's the incorrect response. Who are you? Be in the be state. Tell me, who are you? And it is often because we have no accurate understanding of who we are. At 30, if someone asked me, who am I wouldn't have been able to really tell them. I would tell them what I do or what I have or where I stay, but I would not always be able to say to them, I am Andre. I am a people developer. I exist to help others become who they were destined to be. So that took me 20 years to discover that simple statement that I just formulated for you. So my life has been a great example of not understanding who I was, but fortunately also having discovered who can I be and who am I. And that's what I'm pursuing today. Today, I do all the things I believed I would never be. I develop people, and we do it through talking and so forth. So the things I believed I was not is what I discovered actually I am. But accurate self-awareness are the questions around your identity, in who you are, where are you going to, how are you going to get there. And then when we look at the next building block to be accurately self-aware on an emotional and psychological level is how much confidence do you have? A strong servant leader needs to be confident. But confidence is being confident in who I am. So you can't be confident and have lots of confidence, but you cannot answer accurately, who am I? Often if I have to employ people for a job and I ask them, do you like yourself? People always answer yes. But the moment that I ask them, why are you okay? Tell me, why are you confident in yourself? I don't get very convincing answers. Sometimes I get that people can't even answer me properly. So confidence is built on who you really are. You are confident in your gift, in your strength, in your talent. But if you don't know what that is, how can you truly be the best you can be and be confident in that? So accurate awareness are about these three primary skills: self-confidence, identity, and what emotions drive your behavior. You've got to be clear on those things. When it comes to emotional self-awareness, it says, for servant leaders, do the right thing, but for the right reasons. Accurate awareness says, pursue your identity in being the person you were wired to be, because that will influence what your calling is. And then confidence on a psychological level is the main driving force behind your behavior. What is so fantastic about the Nelson Mandela example is Nelson Mandela accurately understood what gifts and virtues and vices he had, and he made that available for the benefit of society. He was very clear on what was painful to him and what was also positive to him, but he was emotionally very strongly in touch. And then what we loved about Nelson Mandela, and always will remember him for, was he was always confident but never arrogant. Nelson Mandela had this unique trait of being this tremendously humble person, but in the same instance being this extremely resilient and powerful leader who was confident in the gifts and the virtues and the values and the talents and the strengths that he had, and he made that available, not for personal gain, but actually for the benefit of society. Now, when we look at the three primary skills necessary to manage yourself very well as a social and as a servant leader, the first one is to develop self-control. You are not born with self-control. It is a skill that you learn to develop. And self-control is about learning to control your emotions and your thoughts. Because if you can't control your thoughts control your emotions. And if you control your thoughts and your emotions, you can control your behavior. But if you cannot control your thoughts and your emotions, your behavior and your emotions will control you. We always have a saying that says, when people anger you, they control you. So whenever your emotions dominate you, you are not in control of it, your emotions control you. And that's not a good place for any leader, when my bodily urges and my emotions and my environment and events and circumstances controls me. When that happens, it makes me a victim of my circumstances. Nelson Mandela is also famous for saying, I was in jail for 27 years, but my mind was never in jail. That was the first one we discussed, which meant that he always controlled himself very well, controlled his thoughts. And he always to give you an example, to tell you one story, when Nelson Mandela came out of jail, about 2 weeks after he came out of jail, he was the guest of honor in the countryside. But at this function, many of the people who were there were still white people from the old apartheid era, and many of them did not recognize him because at those times in South Africa, in the apartheid times, they never showed pictures of what Mandela looked like. So when Nelson came to this function and he was the guest of honor, there was an old lady who still was part of the old apartheid regime era, and she didn't realize that that was Nelson Mandela standing there. And what she did was she walked up to him and she instructed him almost as if he was a subordinate, almost as if he was a slave, and she said to him, so take these plates and go give it to the boss there. And now that is actually very insulting behavior. But in this instance, what Nelson Mandela did is he just stayed quiet. He walked to the other guy, he gave him the plates that the lady gave him, and then he just said in the Afrikaans language to this guy, which he also can speak, and he just said to him that the missus said, I must give this to you. But it means that he actually responded like people in the apartheid era would wanted him to respond. But he just went back and quietly stood in his place until the function started. But then when the function started, everyone realized this is Mandela, and obviously the way that they treated him was very insulting. And it was a huge embarrassment to the people who organized the function. And after the function, the one person whom he gave the plates to came to him and apologized for how they treated him. And then Nelson Mandela just slightly smiled and he said to him, no worries, I understand. And he just left it there. And people may think, so what is the punchline of this story? The punchline of this story is one, self-control. Nelson Mandela's emotions did not control him. He knew that he had to set an example of what reconciliation is all about. If I don't show people what reconciliation is, they will not understand what it's about. So even if people treated him in insulting ways, he was a very resilient man, so he definitely got very angry when those things happened. But he always made a rational choice to show the example, to model the example, and not to respond like someone who's part of the problem, but someone who's part of the solution. And that is why everyone now loves him and loved him so much. Was the fact of the matter is he showed he never was part of the problem, but always part of the solution. And he modeled examples being part of the solution through his ability to control his emotions and to manage his thoughts. So great confidence, great emotional awareness, but great self-control there also. And then adaptability is about adapting to a new world that changes very fast. Nelson Mandela's life journey was one of a boy who went to school, who became a lawyer, who became a fugitive, who then was a leader, then was a prisoner, then was a president, and then was retired. And so his life had these very huge ups and downs. But the astounding thing of Nelson Mandela was that he had the ability to not just always gain new information, but always been practical to say, how do we apply this and how do we change our behavior so we can make this better and be part of the solution and not part of the problem. So if anything, adaptability was one of his great trademarks in order to make sure that even if events happen that would very often hijack the whole reconciliation process in South Africa, of which we had many, many incidents, he would continuously think instead of just reacting on emotions and reacting like someone who's just part of the problem. So then the next thing is Nelson Mandela was driven by purpose. He was driven by values of reconciliation and forgiveness. And he perceived those values and those beliefs that he had, his optimism and his dream about a free and fair society for all people. And the values that governed his behavior was reconciliation and forgiveness. And those things were bigger than his own ego and his own pocket. So self-motivation for a servant leader primarily comes from within. And it comes from your beliefs and your purpose, your reason for existence, and also for what values do you stand for. What is your life all about? And those things were much greater for Nelson Mandela than any material things. And that is what motivated him, whether he was a prisoner or a president. That is what motivated him tremendously. So when we look at these sets of skills, these 6 skills, 3 of them accurate self-awareness competencies and 3 of them self-management competencies. But these 6 skills made him a very strong intrapersonal personality, a strong individual that was very resilient, that constantly drove towards achieving the goal, and that never deviated from that path regardless of what happened. And what we have learned from his example was these skills are vital prerequisites in order to be a constructive servant leader that produces sustainable, positive results there where you are. Whether it's the world of business or leadership or the world of sport, these traits that I'm discussing with you here today are of vital importance. Then when it comes to social awareness, the first social aware skill that we really need is empathy. Now, empathy does not mean that I feel sorry for you. Empathy actually means that I try to understand your truth or to understand your view or your needs, regardless of my opinion of that. I'm not judging you, but I'm trying to understand your truth. And that means that we need to really care for other people. And this is the challenge in our society, is this word empathy, that very few people have learned the skill of empathy, of putting themselves into the shoes of another human being and looking at the world through their eyes without judging them or without criticizing them. And this is a great skill we need to develop, and very, very few people in positions of leadership sincerely display the skill of empathy towards those they are responsible for. And because of that, it often creates a lot of turbulence in the world of business. Research tells us that in the global village, in a global 9% of the reasons why people get fired is one reason only: lack of interpersonal skills. And interpersonal skills starts by putting yourself into the shoes of other people and sincerely caring about them. Many leaders talk about caring, but they do not necessarily live that example. They are not an example of caring, of taking into consideration the needs and the feelings of the world around them. Many leaders are driven by their own personal ambition and their own greed or their own desires, and they get other people to help them actually just promote that. And that is not the model of servant leadership. Servant leadership says that I stand for a cause, I represent other people, I am the example of what I say I stand for, and I try and do the utmost best in a constructive way to achieve that goal and that dream without on society. Now, the next skill that are of vital importance is service orientation. And that means we've got to learn to develop a mindset of being a servant to others. For instance, all leaders, a servant leader is responsible for his team to anticipate their development needs and their needs for salary and motivation and so forth. If we have people who do not understand and are not orientated towards the word service, we have people who really just don't care and don't anticipate, recognize, and meet the needs of their people. And if I can use an example of the South African landscape, the whole political apartheid system started where a group of people tried to promote their dreams, their vision, but at the cost of another group of people. In other words, there was no service, no servant mindset of saying, let me anticipate, recognize, and meet the need of all people involved. And that is the problem in many countries and many businesses, in many sports teams, that we just care about ourselves, but not about other people. And if we do not have an empathic heart and a service-oriented mindset, then we really just don't care about other people, and I believe that's often the root of all evil. So you are not born with an empathy heart or with a service-oriented mindset. These things are competencies you develop. So the good news is every single leader, if they choose to embrace this model and learn these skills, it will change their performance, and they also can in their own way be truly great servant leaders in the world of business or the world of sport or in communities, or even if it's only in my home as a servant leader to my family.
Doctor, I mean, just sorry to interrupt, sir. I mean, we're already 10 minutes over the time, sir.
Geoffrey?
Yes.
Sorry, I missed you there. Could you just repeat that for me again, please?
Sir, we are 10 minutes over the time, so we have, I mean,
okay, my apologies then. Yeah. If I can, in 1 minute, just to quickly say, there are the other three skills. Sorry, as I had it, was that I thought that it's up to 4:30. My apologies if we are then over the time, and my apologies for this misunderstanding. But communication are the social skills, creating synergy in teams, and then influencing others. But in a nutshell, ladies and gents and listeners there to this model, this is the model that we use in South Africa to, not just in South Africa, it's a world-class, it's a blueprint to develop world-class 21st century servant leaders. And we've been implementing this for 14 years, and it's been working very well, presenting fantastic results. So should people be interested, they're most welcome to connect with me to read the article that goes with this. And my apologies then that we went a little bit over the time, and sorry for that, but this is the framework. And unfortunately, it is quite a detailed framework, so it does take a lot of time to talk it through. But I hope it makes sense, Dr. Geoffrey. Is that in good standing with you then?
Thank you very much, sir. And again, my apologies for interrupting it. I hate to interrupt with such a wonderful presentation and very intriguing one indeed, I must admit. However, we were really pressed on the time. So folks, we are now open for the question and answer. So if you have any questions, please, either you could put it in the question box. I will read them over on your behalf, or you can raise your hand. There's a hand icon available on your webinar console. If you click on it, I'll give you an opportunity to speak to Doctor, and I request you to kindly be brief with your questions and precise so we can move to and manage different questions. So let me move to the first caller. We have Mr. Khwaja Sheikh, who has raised his hand. Mr. Khwaja, would you please introduce yourself and ask the question?
Hi, this is Khwaja Sheikh from the United States of America. Are you able to hear me?
Yes, I could. You just disappeared there for a moment. I missed your name, but I could hear the last part. Can you repeat your name again, please?
Yeah, Khwaja. And
okay, Khwaja, I can hear you.
Yeah, could you suggest some tips to develop the self-awareness? What strategies?
Yes, absolutely. Yes, absolutely. I think my personal opinion, and that is part of the work that we do, is that I believe self-awareness starts with discovering your own neurological design, information. Understand the genetics of your design first. And then secondly, learn to do some assessments. We do that through brain profile assessments that we do, that we've developed ourselves that goes with this program. But we've even also developed some EI, some emotional intelligence assessments. But I mean, this and whatever other assessment you want to use to get to know yourself better is, you are most welcome. Any assessment is a great example, actually, of just developing awareness. Often we can also become more aware of who we are if by just learning what others think of us. But what others think of us is not necessarily always constructive or the truth. But also learning through life's experiences is another way of becoming aware. When you keep on trying out new things, you will learn whether you like it or whether you don't, but that in itself teaches you something about yourself. So other people, life experiences, and assessments are great ways of developing self-awareness. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. And the related question is for the self-management. Any strategies around that?
Yeah, absolutely. I believe that self-management is something where you need to learn in the first place. Self-management starts by managing your mind. So if you can learn skills in how to manage your mind and your thoughts and build new neuron pathways, because when you understand that process, you understand how to take charge of your thoughts. And when you understand how to take charge of your thoughts, then you also know how your thoughts can control your emotions, your behavior, and anything else. So I believe self-management should start with something. We always do it through what we call a mind power workshop, so we can teach people how the mind works and what they need to do in order to change behavior. Does that make sense to you, sir?
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you for asking that question. They are really very relevant. Thank you.
Very much, Mr. Khwaja for your question, and let me move to the question box. We have another one. Isn't it controlling emotions itself a paradox? As an act of controlling self requires patience, which can't be practiced without emotional strength. So how do we develop such an emotional intelligence?
Parts of the question disappeared there, Dr. Jaffrey. Can you just repeat that, please?
Okay, sir. Isn't it controlling emotions itself a paradox, as an act of controlling self requires patience, which can't be practiced without emotional strength?
Well, of course. I mean, emotions are part of who we are. And so if you can't control your emotions, you can't control yourself. The place in the mind, in the brain where emotions are processed are called the limbic system. And it's also called the seat of human behavior. Now, when we look at a model of the brain, the outside layer is called the neocortex, where your thoughts reside. And that is over the limbic system. So you cannot control the part that influences your emotions is the neocortex. That's the top part above the limbic system. So yes, it does require patience, but patience are one of the fruits of proper self-control that we have to develop. And again, self-control starts by developing the mind first. And if you understand how your thoughts control and influence your emotions, thoughts trigger emotions. And in the limbic system, where your emotions reside, is the subconscious, which is the seat of human behavior. So if I do not understand how my thoughts work and how I can control my thoughts, I can never control myself per se. Does that make sense?
Okay, thank you, sir. Another one, a short one about beliefs. Possessing beliefs, are they subject to behavior modification or they're gifted?
Can you repeat that, please? I didn't
Yes,
hear you clearly.
Sir, it's about the beliefs. Possessing beliefs, are they subject to behavior modification or they are gifted? Having beliefs.
Well, I believe your beliefs is where everything starts, because from your belief, that influences your sense of purpose. Your belief influences what values you will deem as important as such. Now, your belief, your sense of purpose, and your values will influence behavior. So, depending on what you believe, that will determine how you modify your behavior. So I have seen people who didn't have strong beliefs and over time have developed strong beliefs, and I am one of them also. So in my younger years, not having strong beliefs, I also didn't have strong values, and my values dictate how I will conduct myself. So my values influence my behavior. But as I have learned to develop strong beliefs, so with the beliefs, out of that grew some strong values, and now my values dictate my behavior. So, you know, our beliefs, our sense of purpose, and our values will directly impact our behavior in a positive or negative way. So I believe I changed a lot of my behavior from negative to positive when I started to developing positive belief systems. Does that make sense, Dr. Jaffrey?
Yes, sir. Let me move to another question from Mr. Alfonso Sagivela. The question is, to what extent do you think motion picture Invictus reflects Mandela's nature of leadership?
Oh yeah, absolutely. In the first place, I am a great Nelson Mandela fan, but in the same instance, in South Africa, rugby is our national sport, so I love rugby a lot. I was at the World Cup, and I have clearly followed Nelson Mandela's impact in that over the years and studied that. And Invictus is an extremely accurate reflection of what Nelson Mandela did. What you saw there is really the truth that went down behind the scene in order for us to win the World Cup at that time. So Invictus is a great movie to watch, and it is very accurate. It is not a too dramatic or an over-dramatization or an inaccurate dramatization of what happened, but rather an accurate dramatization of it. So thanks for asking that, and because I'm a rugby and a Mandela fan, I saw the movie, watched it many, many times, and it's all true that you saw there, yes.
Okay, sir, we have another one from Dr. Zahid. The question is, besides virtues, do you think there ever were any vices, negative traits, Nelson Mandela, and how he overcome those?
Yes, yes. You know, I'm glad you asked that question. You know, the world often talks a lot about Nelson Mandela as a very positive man, and you want to sort of get the idea that he almost was he was a little bit of a supernatural human being, and that's not true whatsoever. Not true whatsoever. Nelson Mandela, for instance, had a huge temper, and he became often very his way very quickly, or he would become very angry with people who challenged his integrity, or if people came with what he perceived as a low political trick to put him in the wrong light, he would become very angry, and he would really sort of how can I say, lose his temper and take that person on publicly and so on. Yes, so very definitely he was just an ordinary man with great virtues, but also just an ordinary man who was sometimes impatient. He had very little tolerance, for instance, for people who are always late. And he would also sometimes, he would very quickly, in the truth, in a respectful manner, but directly address even some presidents who wasted his time or who did not stick to their time management abilities. So, and even when you look at the papers about how the family, behind the scenes, the Mandela family had many arguments and misunderstandings with each other, you realize that he was also just an ordinary father who did not always have all the answers to the challenges that any family experiences, and that he also received some criticism from his children for sometimes not doing certain things as a father was supposed to be, or what they would have liked him to do or so. So there are, yes, there are definitely ordinary human being also with his own weaknesses. He was, however, wise enough to know what those weaknesses were and would often then use other people who had strengths in those areas to let them contribute there.
One last question. What is the percentage of internal leadership factors as compared to the external ones in the business? From Brother Samir Sheikh.
Can you repeat that again? What is the percentage?
Of the internal leadership factors compared to the external ones in the business.
You know, I don't think I can give a percentage, but if I can just answer that, and that's just purely based on my subjective opinion and not necessarily because I'm trying to state anything here as a scientific fact, what I would say is that, in my opinion, it's always a 50-50 story. Just as who we are, part of who we are is based on what the environment does, and part of who we are is based on the genetics, what we inherited from our parents. And so I believe, in terms of the external and the internal leadership factors, if I correctly understood the participant, I think it would be a 50-50 percent where, you know, your world still molds you to become a certain type of person, but I do believe you need to have some inherent qualities that you can use to become that leader. If I can go back to our previous, or when we started, we said that servant leadership is about influence, service, and inspiration. And my opinion is we all serve, but in different ways, based on our unique gifts and talents. We all influence, but in different ways, based on our unique gifts and talents. And we all inspire people, but in different ways, based on who we are. But I do believe be the internal factors first.
Okay, well, that really brings us towards the end of the webinar. I would like to thank you, Dr. Antwi, for a very, very interesting and intriguing presentation. So any concluding remarks that you would like to give before we dismiss out?
Yes, I would perhaps, to conclude, in my opinion, always what is important is that, you know, this leadership model, as I've explained it here to you, is one that I believe has transformed my life and is still transforming my life. Also, I would like to suggest that one should not look at this as a course that you do, but yes, you should do courses to learn these things, but it is rather a development process that continues until the day that you die. You never get to a 10 out of 10 for self-motivation, or a 10 out of 10 to an ultimate and like 10 out of 10 and you cannot improve any further for service-orientedness or empathy or confidence. It's a continuously evolving process. So see this as a process. 2, I would suggest apply this to your own personal life. it changes you for the positive profoundly and makes life just so much more rewarding. But then the last comment from my side would also be to say that this type of model renders tremendous business results in the world of business. We have applied this model for the past 15 years in the world of business, and there are some motor manufacturers and some mines that we work at where these programs have been running now for 14 years, giving them a result where it improves their bottom line, so they make more money. The people have less accidents, there's less absenteeism, it positively impacts the culture change of the organization. So when this becomes a way of life and business, it truly also transforms business and prepares business for true 21st century performance.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Andre Vermeulen, for a very, very interesting presentation. I would like to thank you on behalf of Medina Institute for Leadership and Entrepreneurship, MILE, and thank you all of those who participated in this webinar and for posing interesting questions. We are recording this webinar, which will be uploaded on our community, community.mile.org. So please stay tuned to our community for our even upcoming programs or to access the archive section of the webinars. Well, with that, I would like to end this webinar. So thank you very much once again, everyone. You all have a good day, good evening, wherever you're calling from.
Medina Institute for Leadership and Entrepreneurship, MILE.